Hey, Brambro back with some Grand Tactician Civil War and our new CSA campaign in the 1.06 live. Okay, so at the beginning of the last episode, episode 2, I kind of just did something a little uncharacteristic for me. I said, okay, I did a bunch of all-camera stuff. I did some Army stuff. I did some Navy stuff. Okay, let's go. And I didn't talk very much about what I had done. And I know that there's some people out there who like to hear that stuff. And the reason I did that was because after the campaign start episode, having been, basically almost an hour of just talking about finances and projects and policies and so forth, I didn't want to do that again in episode 2, and I wanted to get the time rolling and try to get into that early battle that I knew would probably occur, and I didn't want a 2-hour episode with 40 minutes of talking before that. So, now that that battle has occurred, let's go back and talk a little bit about armies and navies and forts and weapons, to the extent of catching everybody up on how I've got this thing organized and a few plans for the Navy and that sort of thing. Okay, well, I think everyone's got a pretty good idea what's going on with our two main armies over here in Virginia. They just got the stuffing walloped out of them. And it's a pretty interesting situation because that was a Confederate victory. It's even reflected as such right on the campaign map. Battle of Winchester, Confederate minor victory. And guess what? It doesn't look to me that these guys aren't still engaged. I don't think they're still engaged. Maybe they are. But I don't, usually you come out of a battle and everyone is still engaged because the game is still replicating the time it took to fight the battle. That's not happening here. I think the armies are disengaged. And McDowell is not retreating. He is still sitting right there on Winchester. And it looks like Winchester is about to be captured. And I don't think there's a damn thing I can do about it. Because both armies' readiness has been driven into the toilet from that battle. Appropriately so, I must say. And, the morale isn't very good. Stable in both cases. And we're low on supplies. We do have a bit of ammo. Yeah. Basically what I'm saying is I don't know if we can afford to try to fight another battle here. Now, he's been beat up too. Army of Northeastern Virginia took almost as many casualties as we did. But anyway, what I had done off camera with these armies is I had taken their present units and divided them out into divisions, the divisions that we saw during the battle. Longstreet, Ewell, and AP Hill, as we saw during the battle, are the division commanders in the Army of Northern Virginia. I've already had to make some replacements right here. McLaws was wounded in that battle, so I pulled John Mosby in to command here just now. That this wasn't done off camera before the battle. And I had Winder in charge of the artillery going into that battle, and he was not wounded, but I've pulled him out, and I've put John Pemberton in charge of the artillery in this army, and I think he may stay there. And here's the reason I did that. Number one, he's not much good for anything else. It's got to be said. However, Pemberton has got high admin, right? Ammo replenishment. When men are well fed, have ammo, and are well drilled, they perform better in battle. And I think that's so it's. I don't know if anyone's really done an analysis of just how much these leader attributes really matter. I tend to think that leadership is the highest, is the most important of these four, at least for the infantry brigades. But if admin helps recover readiness faster and helps with ammunition usage and resupply, I'm kind of thinking admin is what I'm going to try to prioritize for artillery. Because it turns out that in 1.06, artillery ammunition tends to be the hardest thing to keep at 100% supply. In previous versions of the game, up through 1.05, the long pole in the tent, as it were, for supply tended to be provisions. Not now. Artillery ammo. That there's going to be lots of cases where they've got plenty of everything except arty ammo. So I'm going to try high admin guys in charge of artillery. That plus kind of getting their shit back together, I think, is really needed for the artillery in these two armies after the drubbing they took in that battle. They were just wiped out at the beginning. And I have read others, like in Steam discussions and so forth, talk about, wow, the AI counter battery is really strong now. And for whatever reason, I just didn't really see that in the last campaign, but boy, we saw it in that battle. They took my arty out. You guys saw it. You know. Anyway, so Pemberton is in charge of the arty in the Army of Northern Virginia. And I don't know, may stay there for a long time. We also had Bernard B. wounded over in Johnston's army. And I brought Simon Bolivar Buckner in to replace him. And so the Shenandoah Army's got two little divisions with Jackson and Kirby Smith in charge of them. Just the 4 brigades. And these brigades really didn't do all that. Yeah, they're a little depleted after that fight. Whew. And so are the arty. Now, actually, these two battalions, I don't think they really lost that many men. It's because they routed so quickly that they didn't have a chance to lose all their guns. Okay, now this unit, it's 330 cavalry. He was useful at the very beginning in a scouting role, and then kept him out of combat. But I think what I'm going to do with this unit So I've never used this replenish unit function before. Send this unit on a furlough in its home state to recuperate and recruit. During this time will not be available, but will receive reinforcements faster. So that sounds pretty attractive. There's only one problem with that. And this is the only way I know to go see. Virginia doesn't have anybody in its manpower pool. So there are no reinforcements to go to Stewart's cavalry for the moment. Now the reason why there aren't any recruits in Virginia is because they've all already been... The game kind of starts you with all of Virginia's men already mobilized. That's who makes up the majority of these two armies, is Virginia brigades. And so they've got more men in service, more men fielded than anybody else. So that's why there's no men here. But for the moment, there is no one to replace anybody in this cav. And that's a problem. Not just for this cav, but for, this is a Virginia unit. That's Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee. Okay, maybe it's not as bad. There is a Virginia unit. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So that's 4 brigades. And then these guys are 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's 7 brigades right now, 8 brigades right now that are not receiving any replacements because there is no one to come. Now some of those brigades have not been engaged, so they haven't lost a lot of men, but they ain't gaining any either. I'm going to leave that cav in here for now. He can at least scout. I would put it in replenish mode, except I just don't think it would help at the moment with 0 recruits available in Virginia's manpower pool. Alright. Missouri Army, same sort of thing. There's a couple, organized into divisions, a couple of infantry divisions, an arty division, and some cav. I always put Marmaduke in charge of the Missouri Cav. It's just what I do because he's a Missouri guy. He's kind of one of my favorites, and that's where I put him. And it's just the way it is. Marmaduke, and I've talked about this in previous campaigns, not the last one though. West Point guy, which is appropriate. He did go to West Point and was serving in the U.S. Army at the time that the war started, so that, that's accurate. They could also have tagged him with the political officer as well, because he was in that world too. Came from a very political family. His grandfather had been governor of Kentucky. His father had been governor of Missouri fairly recently, I think, at the time that the war started. His uncle, his maternal uncle, I think, different last name, is currently governor of Missouri at the time that the war starts. And pretty interestingly, his father, the previous governor, was solidly pro-Union, anti-secessionist in Missouri, which was fairly evenly split on pro and anti-secession. And his father was on the pro-Union side. His uncle, the sitting governor of Missouri, was very much not just pro-secession, but like as would be appropriate for the governor, right? Kind of the leader of the pro-secession movement. And Marmaduke kind of threw in with his uncle, not with his daddy. Now, Marmaduke would have been in the Army anyway, and as a West Pointer, probably would have kind of been on the short list for promotion. But even with that, some of the jobs that he got and his association with, his uncle, I think that probably played a role too in his, what he did and how fast he advanced during the war. So they could have tagged him with the political pretty easily, I think. And there are some other generals that have both. There's not many, but some. Isaac Stevens and Oliver Howard on the Union side are two such. So they're not mutually exclusive. I don't know that Marmaduke was particularly distinguished in his performance during the war, but in what little I've read of him, doesn't seem to have... he seems to have done a solid, kind of held kind of held down the fort and did okay at whatever rank he was at throughout the war. So not a standout, but it wasn't exactly a Peter Principle candidate either. And then after the war, much after the war, into the 1880s, John Marmaduke will be governor of Missouri himself. Okay, so there's a little history interlude that I like to throw in from time to time in these campaigns. A little bit about John Marmaduke. And I think I've got another one of those that I'll probably talk about during this episode. Okay, this little peninsula army down here, this was the Hampton Legion. Not much going on. I have recruited one brigade. He's got Loring coming to him. It's going to be quite, let's see. Yeah, still 2 weeks until Loring shows up. And we have the Fort Norfolk garrison. Let's just rename it. He's not going to go back to Fort Norfolk. So Billy Mahone was sitting over there in Fort Norfolk with an extra brigade underneath the intrinsic organic garrison, and I don't think Fort Norfolk is particularly threatened. So I've pulled them out and brought them over to Magruder's force. And these guys actually started the campaign armed with Enfields. That's cool. So I didn't want them just sitting in Fort Norfolk. They're in the game. What else we got? These are garrisons. And then finally we've got the Army of Tennessee under Albert Sidney Johnston, which is being combined. The dark red, these are the forces present in Nashville. They started at Nashville, and then all these grayed out ones, they're not recruits, they're on the map. These are the Florida guys coming up from Pensacola in transfer. So they'll be up here fairly soon, I think. 10 days, 9 days, yeah, about a week and a half. And then this is the force that I intend to send up and see if we can nab Louisville, and see if we can get an early Kentucky secession without having to fight, as we talked about toward the end of episode 1. Yeah, I just recruited a few little engineers to go build a telegraph line over to Arkansas and connect Sterling Price's army. And then I've got a recruiting command under Braxton Bragg, and this is at Atlanta. And the last what I've done in previous campaigns, people will maybe be familiar with is one east, one west, and the idea is that they'll grab their guys up a little bit faster drawing. But I didn't want to have. I think one's enough, and it'll still go fast enough. And Braxton Bragg is in charge of that. And that is, he's another 3-star administration guy. So the idea is that as these brigades join the recruiting command, they'll come up and achieve readiness faster under Braxton Bragg with that admin before we send them out to the field armies. And this is a good point to talk about something else. Okay, so this is going to be obscure, but it's going somewhere. Okay, bear with me. In the mid-19th century, there was a fair amount of immigration into Texas from Germany. And this area in here, kind of in between San Antonio and Austin, extends up this way toward Fredericksburg, but also down this way, kind of east of San Antonio, all through here where I'm twirling my mouse pointer. I do this circly, twirly mouse pointer thing all the time. This is an area of Texas called the Hill Country, for good reason. It's kind of hilly in there. It's a pretty pleasant place. If you've never visited the Texas Hill Country, it's pretty nice. Even in the summertime. It gets hot, but it's not real humid in here, and the nights kind of cool off. And it's a pretty popular place within Texas to go spend a weekend, right? The rivers run really cold on rocky bottoms, and it's just a nice area. And a lot of these Germans settled in here, right? And this is even going back before the Civil War, even when Texas was a republic, before it became a state in the U.S. And so there's a lot of towns in here that have German names and a lot of German surnames among the folks. Fredericksburg, the World War II Admiral Chester Nimitz, right, comes from a Texas German family. And Fredericksburg is where he was born, and the Chester Nimitz Museum is there today. Okay, so why is Bram talking about Germans in Texas? Because toward the end of the last campaign, we had one of our subs who made a comment saying, and it was right at the very end, so I didn't do it, but he said, hey, how about a German brigade in the Army? And that made me think of these Texas Germans. It's like, I think we can do that. So, here in the Recruiting Army Command, wrong button there, right down here at the bottom, here you go. We have the 1st Texas Deutsch Brigade, because it turns out they recruited this Texas Brigade, and there was an unusual proportion, I'm role-playing, of hill country guys in here. And so in honor of that, we have the Texas Deutsch Brigade. Now, they're Germans, but they're still Texans, so I gave them the jaunty hat there. And Prussian blue seemed appropriate for this unit. However, on the coat, that just looked too Yankee. Don't want these guys to get, drawing too much friendly fire. So they got the gray coat, but Prussian blue trousers. And they are under the command of Lawrence Sullivan Ross. Sol Ross. And that's a pretty interesting character, too. Kind of a frontier guy, family originally from, at least he was born in Iowa, but they moved to Texas when it was a republic, helped found the town of Waco at a time when Waco was way out there, or on the ragged edge of the frontier. And, a big part of Sol Ross's teenage years and early life was spent fighting Comanches, which was, that was pretty rough sledding, if anyone is aware of that little episode in U.S. or Texas history. Got pretty severely wounded as a teenager, to the point where it looked lethal, that he wasn't going to make it. It took both gunshot and arrow wound. But he did survive it. He was a Texas Ranger as a young man, and that wasn't involved in the rescue of Cynthia Ann Parker. If that rings a bell with anybody, that was kind of a noteworthy event in the course of all that Comanche fighting. Rose to be a brigadier general in the Confederate States Army. We'll see if maybe that happens here. He was primarily a cavalry guy in the Trans-Mississippi, so he did not fight in many large battles. I think the largest fight Sol Ross was ever in was maybe Pea Ridge, which wasn't that big. But saw a lot of combat, like skirmishing, raiding, all that sort of thing in the Trans-Mississippi. After the war, was a pretty successful rancher and farmer in the Waco area, prospered. And later he himself became governor of Texas. Pretty popular and successful one. Two terms, and would have been a shoo-in for a third. There weren't any term limits then in Texas like there are now, but refused to run. And after he gave up the governorship, people are maybe wondering, why in the world is Bram going on about Sol Ross, this pretty obscure character in Civil War terms? After being governor, Sol Ross became an early president of then an obscure little bitty struggling college on the Brazos River, right in this area, not too far south of Waco. The Agricultural and Mechanical College of Texas. And he was not the first president, but he is widely regarded as having established that institution and made it successful, ensured its survival, and is fondly remembered today as the father of what is known today as Texas A&M University. And that's mainly what Sol Ross is known for, and remembered for in Texas. And your humble YouTuber is a proud graduate of that institution. And that's how I know a little something something about Sol Ross. And Sunflex, you got your German brigade in here. They're Texas Germans, but that's going to have to do. Okay, so that's what we got for the armies. And y'all can see there I've already got like 7 brigades coming. I normally wait in these campaigns to get a longer militia act before recruiting a lot of troops. However, with the strategy that I'm pursuing on the Military 2 and the conscription, that kind of bypasses that concern. So I'm recruiting a bunch of troops now. And in fact, I need to recruit some more artillery as well. Well, we've already got infantry on the way to Atlanta. Yeah, that telegraph. Do we have telegraph at Atlanta? I hope we should. Yeah, we do. It's just not drawing the main trunk line through there yet. They're in telegraph connectivity, though. Okay, Navy. Let's talk about the Navy, what we've done there. We start the campaign with just a whole bunch of little tramp steamers and various polyglot collections along the coast. And I've redistributed most, if not all of those. So what are we doing with Navy in this campaign? Anyone who's seen in my previous campaigns, none of this is going to look terribly new, because it's a strategy that works, and that's what I'm going to do. But it's got 4 elements. Element 1, lots and lots of gunboats that we are going to put all along these rivers in the west. The Mississippi, at least the lower Ohio. I don't know if we're going to go all the way up like we did before. The Cumberland, the Tennessee, possibly, as events dictate, possibly up the Red River and the Arkansas River. Yeah, spelled the same, right? No, it's not showing. Okay, this is the Arkansas River, spelled exactly the same. However, the state is pronounced Arkansas. The river is pronounced Arkansas. Don't know why, just is. Possibly because the river actually starts or runs through Kansas. Maybe that's why. Anyway, English is a funny language. American English is a funny language. Even funnier language. So we're going to put a lot of gunboats up in these rivers for spotting and to help deny river transport to Union armies. And so I've got a lot of gunboats. I've already got like a few already. There's a gunboat at Nashville, one at Decatur, one at Memphis, but there's a lot of gunboats being built. They're really cheap and really fast to build, and so I don't think I hurt my finances too much by doing that. But it won't be long before all these rivers are just choked with tons of gunboats. That's okay. So that's item number 1 for Navy. Item number 2. There's a cluster of ports down here: New Orleans, Biloxi, Mobile, and to some extent Pensacola, that tend to all get blockaded by one blockade fleet here off the Mississippi Delta. These are big ports. They're not our biggest port. The biggest port is up here at Norfolk, Virginia. Okay? But there are no other big ports up around Norfolk. So it turns out that the one Union blockade fleet that covers the most port capacity is this Mississippi Delta one that we don't see yet, but it's going to show up pretty soon. And these ports are the ones that I want to prioritize keeping clear. And so I have a couple of small fleets, one at Mobile, one at New Orleans, that I'm calling raiding squadrons, raidrons, and their job is going to be to conduct raiding attacks on that particular blockade fleet. they will probably lose those battles and lose ships and that sort of thing. But hopefully they drive down the readiness of that fleet enough to make it hard for that fleet to blockade and keep these ports blockade free. We'll see how that works out. Item 3 in the naval plan is here at Jacksonville. I've got a little fleet of Atlantic blockaders, and it's mostly little schooners. They're just kind of the ships I had left over after the raid runs were put together. And they are going to come out here and come up here, and they're going to blockade the Union coastline. Maybe New York area, maybe southern New England. And should the CSA be able to do that in this game? One can argue that. Probably not. It's no secret that the devs need to work on naval AI. But it is possible, and therefore I'm going to do it, because economy is the name of the game in 1.06, and blockade has become increasingly important in the economic side of the game. And so I'm going to do it. And we'll see if... we already saw here in this battle that, the land AI in the live version is already showing signs of being significantly different than what we saw in the beta 1.6 campaign just concluded. So it's possible that these guys might come up here and the Union does chase them away. Part of me hopes that they do. Part of me will be perfectly happy with them being able to sit up here and blockade the entire game. Not gonna lie. So that's item 3. And then item 4 is we have these raid runs down here to early on try to keep these ports clear. But longer term, I want to lift the Union blockade all along our coast. And it's going to take a real squadron of ships to do that. And just like I was just saying on the blockade, should the CSA be able to form such? Yeah, I don't know. But we can, and I have. And so we've got 8 frigates, sail frigates building. It's showing 0 days because time hasn't run yet. But yeah, we're going to form a battle squadron of frigates, and they are going to go out and clear these Union blockade fleets along the Atlantic coast. Possibly. It depends on Fort Monroe. If Fort Monroe, because if I put them at Norfolk, they can't get out of Norfolk until Fort Monroe is taken care of. So if the status of this fort allows, they'll come out and clear the Atlantic coast. If not, then I'll form them at Mobile, and we'll just clear the Gulf Coast first. And then we'll bring them up the Atlantic coast. And same sort of thing, CSA shouldn't be able to do that. Well, I don't disagree. But in GTCW, we can. Now, it is pretty expensive, okay? Frigates are not super... they're not as expensive as ironclads and steam frigates and that sort of thing, but they're not cheap. And I just built 8 of them, so, that could create quite a hit. Right now we're showing 0 of 0 shipyard. I think time just has to run for this. Look at this. We're down to 36,000 men in uniform. Almost half of the Union. Anyway, so that is what's going on with Navy. I also went around and forts. Both sides start with a lot of pre-war forts, and most of ours really aren't very important. Now these few here on the rivers, these are fairly important. Fort Henry and Donelson, Fort Pillow above Memphis, because these exert control on rivers here. Forts are pretty good for that because they tear up fleets something fierce. You need a really strong fleet to go up against a fort. Most forts, however, are kind of superfluous. Don't have to worry about them. There's a whole bunch. We have a whole bunch over here in the Indian Territory. You know, there's one up here at there's one over here in Texas. Got a bunch all along the coast that should be important if the Union did amphibious attacks on our coast, and maybe one day they will. In the current state of the game, they typically do not. So most of these forts are not important. What is important is getting a lot of political officers in command, because political officers in command increases the state support from their home states. Forts count as a command. So it's a good idea, and I think many players do this, at the beginning of the campaign, to go around and put political officers, the worst ones. Some of them are pretty good, and you want to keep those for your field armies, of course. But some of the lesser ones, go around and plug them into fort command. It's not going to hurt anything, and it will increase their state support. And most of these forts, the game starts them with non-historical, random generated volunteer officers. And so even though you're putting kind of the worst political officers in command of these forts, they're still usually an improvement over the volunteer who's sitting there already. So it's kind of a win-win all around, and worth doing at the beginning of the campaign. So that's what I did. Alright, I'm doing something else in this campaign that I haven't really done before. Not on this scale. I kind of experimented with it before. Didn't really talk about it in previous campaign. But I'm going whole hog this time around. Let's start with here. So there's this military experience stat. And basically what this does, each battle, no matter if won or lost, adds to military experience as soldiers and commanders learn how to fight and train in this new kind of war. With military experience, more entrenchments, and new commanders have better initial experience values. Okay? So it starts pretty low, but it will increase as the campaign goes on gradually, and military experience feeds into all of these unassigned officers. Let me turn off the filters here. All these unassigned officers gradually grow in experience while they're sitting here in the pool unassigned. Most of these officers you can't use at their current rank, right? Lieutenant colonels, majors, captains, and lieutenants can't command anything except for artillery battalions. And there aren't that many of those. Not nearly as many arty as there are infantry and cavalry brigades, and those all require colonels. So they're sitting over here gaining this experience, and I don't think it really matters if they gain it as a lieutenant or a captain or as a colonel. In either way, the vast majority of these guys have to be promoted to colonel anyway whenever you actually use them in the army. So what I've done is I went through all of these lieutenant colonels, majors, captains, and lieutenants, and anybody that looked even remotely decent. There's a couple I left down here because for artillery, like old Pegram here. Well, he's really not that great, but there's a few I left down here. But I promoted a ton of all these guys to colonel. And the Confederate States Army, we have 235 colonels unassigned. Because I did them all. The West Pointers, the politicals, the volunteers. I just took a whole bunch of guys and made them colonels. And to be honest, I was pretty surprised. Never having done it on that scale before, I was pretty surprised at how little their stats got impacted by doing this. I mean, most of these officers did lose a star or two, but many of them did not, even among volunteers and politicians. And I had several that I promoted from lieutenant all the way up to colonel, 4 bumps, who did not lose a star in any attribute. So, and kind of the impression I got was if an officer was going to lose any ability, it was on that first promotion, right? Lieutenant to captain, captain to major. Further promotions after that didn't affect them. So going from lieutenant to captain, that's where the loss happens. Going from lieutenant to colonel didn't hurt any more than going from lieutenant to captain, because they wouldn't lose anything on the captain to major, the major to lieutenant colonel, and the lieutenant colonel to colonel promotions. Now that may not happen if you do it at different times, right? Like if I were to take Pegram, bump him up to captain, and he loses a star somewhere in administration, I guess, and then close the window, run time, come back later, and then promote him to captain to major, yeah, he may lose another one. But if right now, if I were to promote him from lieutenant to captain, and then promote him again to colonel, if he loses anything, I don't think we're going to see it. Matter of fact, let's just do one. Okay, Beckham. I don't know how I didn't promote him before, because he looks okay. Let's see. Well, he's a West Pointer though. Let's find. Yeah, it's like Robert Anderson. I left him down here because he's an artillery guy. So even though he's pretty good. Alright, so here's a political guy. And he's got a little bit of leadership and admin. So let's see what happens to this when we promote him. From lieutenant to captain. No loss. Captain to major. Okay, so he loses a little bit there. Making a liar out of me, what I said before. Okay, lieutenant colonel. Same. Colonel. Same. Alright. So on 3 out of those 4 promotions, he didn't lose anything. He did lose his stars in leadership and admin. However, he had already achieved that once, and now he's going to be up here getting military experience, and he'll get those leadership and admin stars back fairly quickly, I bet. Now he's not, I'm not going to plug him into a brigade real soon, probably. But later in the war, when it's time for, hey, we need McGowan in here, he's going to already be a colonel, and by then I'm pretty sure he will have regained his stats and maybe even gotten some more. Okay, enough on that. Not too much to say about weapons because we don't have anything unlocked and we can't buy anything. However, what I have done, the only thing that we can order, that we can produce, are howitzers, and I have done that with 24-pound howitzers. I've got 256 of them on the way, and they're going to be here in about 3 months. Okay? That kind of shows the long lead time that I was talking about in episode 1 for getting weapons actually in the hands of the troops. Why 24-pound howitzers? Because in this campaign I'm pursuing rifled artillery as my rifle project. And at least for now, I am not intending to pursue cast artillery which means that for smoothbores, I am not intending to produce Napoleons. At least for now. I might change my mind on that. 24-pound howitzers aren't terrible. They're not great, they're not terrible. They are only 1,300 range. And they're only mediocre accuracy. And their reload rate isn't all that fantastic either. However, when they do hit, they hit pretty hard. Especially close range for canister. And that is the idea behind the smoothbore battalions in direct infantry support. So, anyway, I got 256 of these coming. Buildings. The Confederacy starts with one bank. That's it. And we're not going to be able to build a bank for a long time because of the way that the policies and projects are structured. I think I talked about that before, but just real short. In order to build banks, the prerequisite is the Bank Act, which is all the way down here in Chapter 3, and it is, in its prerequisite, is Government Funding 3, which is also in Chapter 3. Chapter 3 gets unlocked in early November 1862, which is almost a year and a half from now. So you got to wait till November, and then you got to do Government Funding 3, and then you got to do Bank Act. So it's going to be probably 3.5 months for these two, which means it's pretty much impossible to build a bank until February 1863, just because of the way that this is put together. So this bank in New Orleans is all we're going to have until then. So to get what we can from this bank, I have already ordered to upgrade it. That cost a pretty penny. Actually, it really didn't cost that much. I think it was $5 million. And then that's all we're going to get. There is only one upgrade. There's Tier 1 and Tier 2 for these federal buildings, as far as I've been able to see. So what does a bank do? Well, it provides available capital. There is a heat map that shows its area of effect. It's right around in here. Okay. And what it does is it makes new buildings in this area cheaper to build. It reduces the upkeep cost of existing buildings in the area. That's one major thing. The other major thing that banks do is they improve private wealth, which is pretty important, and there's not that many ways to influence it. If you've got good private wealth and it's increasing, that helps the national morale situation. If you have shitty private wealth and it's decreasing, you'll actually get a national morale nerf from that. And so, and like I said, there's not really many levers that can be pulled to influence private wealth directly. Well, one of the few levers available is banks. And so the one bank we have, that's why I'm upgrading it primarily. Okay, so I did that. What do markets do? Hold on, before going off banks. We did some experimentation early in the last campaign during beta about banks and their effects. And what it looked like at the time was that you'd get this little heat map area. But then if you took a building and tried to build it, we could see in the tooltips for building buildings that the actual effect of the bank extended much further than the heat map showed. You know, we were getting some small effect from available capital to build new buildings as far west as Beaumont, almost as far as Beaumont, up to about Vicksburg, and over almost as far as Pensacola, right? So it looked like the actual area of effect of the bank was like this, not the red heat map. Apparently that's been fixed. because I'm not getting that anymore. And we can show that. Let's say I was going to build a farm, right? And in close, you can see in the environment tooltip to the right down there, available capital rich, reduced cost minus 11K. And what we were seeing before is that we would see at least low levels of available capital way out to like this Beaumont, Vicksburg, Pensacola arc. And we're not seeing that now, okay? Like in this area, no available capital. Even in some of the heat map areas, we're not seeing that much. So the area of effect of banks has been reduced compared to the beta, right? And that was a beta, so they just adjusted it before it went live to what they wanted. Okay, let's talk a little bit about markets. And we start with a couple. There's one at Charleston, there's one at New Orleans, and that's it. What do markets do? They improve infrastructure at the IIPs around them, which therefore increases, or should increase, our transport capacities. Okay, and early on, I already talked about how important these ports were, and ports are IIPs. So their area is not showing yet because they're still building. But I've placed some markets down here around these Gulf Coast ports. And I also put a few up here along the Atlantic coast for the main seaports. And that will look familiar to folks who have watched the beta campaign before as well. Now eventually, there's going to be a lot of markets all over the place, depending on if I feel like we can afford them, right? Maybe we will, but that's the plan. And we'll see if the plan meets reality. But in addition to railroads, rivers are also important supply and trade conduits. And so I would plan to kind of sprinkle markets up along the Mississippi at these river ports along in here, and also on the Arkansas and the Red, as well as the Cumberland and the Tennessee. Kind of the main railroad lines that run up into Tennessee and Kentucky, and then down through the middle of the Confederacy and an arc from Vicksburg all the way up into Virginia. Some markets along there. This railroad line from Georgia up into Tennessee from this direction. And then later, depending on how things go in Kentucky, maybe some along here on the Cumberland, what will become the Cumberland Gap Railroad. It depends on how things go. At campaign start, I do realize that I had forgotten to start one of our railroads. And there's a couple of options. There is they're both in Texas, and one runs up to Little Rock, and one runs over here to Shreveport. And at those cities, they do connect to the larger rail system, right? Because our current system runs to Shreveport and to Little Rock. So I want to get one of these building. I think I'm going to do the faster one. This one's 322. This one's 265. Okay. Well, this one's actually a bigger, longer railroad, but we'll do this one first. Okay. Right. And that's going to create rail up through here to Dallas and then over to Shreveport in here. There's a lot of agricultural goods that are produced in Texas. We're gonna have a lot of oversupply in this area on things like forage and crops and all that sort of thing. And this railroad should help them moving eastward. It was just a question of, do we want them moving eastward this way or eastward this way? I don't think it really matters that much. Now, there is a railroad construction speed project. Railroad construction. Each level further increases the speed of constructing new railroad lines. It turns out, from the experimentation done in the previous beta campaign, that this will speed up construction of railroads depending on how many levels you have when you first hit the construct button. As this improves, it is not going to speed up this Houston-Shreveport Railroad that we just started, which is a little bit sad, but that's the way it worked out in the last campaign. It should, however, significantly decrease the time that it will take to build the railroad to Little Rock. So that's good. So my plan is, while railroad number 1 is building, I am going to put levels of political subsidies into the railroad project during that time. Once this railroad is done, however, then we got what we got for railroad construction levels, and we'll build railroad number 2. At that point, I'm not going to put any more political subsidies into railroad construction, because after these 2 railroads are built, we may not have another railroad to build. And so that investment would never have an effect. And the general plan would be, by that time, if we control the IIPs here in eastern Kentucky, instead of this other Texas railroad, I will probably build the Cumberland Gap Railroad between Knoxville and Lexington. We'll see how that works out. Okay, on the subject of buildings, the Confederacy starts with one and only one iron mine, and that is here at Knoxville. It is a tier 1, and it can only go to tier 2. But this thing is super expensive to upgrade. 18 million. Unlike the federal buildings, to upgrade these mines, you can use industrial subsidies for that. So I think I am going to let industry subsidies build, and this will be the first use of industry subsidies to upgrade this iron mine at Knoxville. And let's see, we can spend 18 million now directly out of the treasury, or we can let industry subsidies build, and it'll cost 3.7 million from subsidies, not from the national treasury. So I'm going to wait on this, and we'll use that to upgrade the iron mine. And then after that, we will do the same with, let's see if I can find it. Yeah, with this lead mine. The Austinville lead mine is the Confederacy's only lead mine. This is the only one we got. And I'm going to upgrade this one the same way with industry subsidy. So that's our first 2 uses of that subsidy. Lead is used in small arms ammunition. That's why it's important. The Confederacy also starts with only one copper mine, which I think is somewhere around Chattanooga, maybe. The thing with that, and we also only start with one gold mine, but to be honest, I'm not sure exactly what gold is used for. But also around here, there's a copper mine somewhere. And as far as I can see, the copper mine is not that important, because copper is only used for one thing, to make bronze, and bronze is only used for one thing, to make artillery. Which may sound important, and it is. However, you just really don't wind up making that much artillery, even if you're spamming artillery battalions in lots of places in the Army. The drain on copper and bronze isn't very high. And so I think that our 1 copper mine at tier 1 will be more than enough to meet the demand. So I'm not going to upgrade that. And unless someone out there knows something that I don't, which is very possible. I mean, gold mine sounds important, but I don't know what role gold plays in the economy. It's not used to make anything. I mean, maybe it improves credit rating because you've got more bullion reserves in your banks. I mean, that would make sense, but I don't know if it actually is modeled. So if anyone has some knowledge, not speculation, some knowledge, because they've gone in the game files and understand this, on what exactly gold does, that I would, I'd like to hear that. Okay, and so that should kind of catch everything up on what I had done off camera before we went into this battle up here in Northern Virginia. And we're in a little bit of a pickle here, as I talked about at the beginning of the campaign. We won this battle, but the Union's not going anywhere, and he's still capturing Winchester, and our 2 armies here aren't really in condition to fight. I do still plan to, talked about this before, I intend to give the Union, we almost did it here at Winchester. It came very close. But I didn't want to lose that battle, and didn't, by the skin of our teeth. But I do want to hand the Union an early victory to stop the Union's gradual national morale loss. And I'm still planning to do that here with the West Virginia Army coming up to engage McClellan and will then retreat. That's still happening. My original plan had been that these forces would then join up with the Peninsula Army. I don't know. They may come over here and join up with the main armies. They need the help. Tennessee Army, as already talked about, they're going to get their brigades up from Florida, get some yellow readiness, that'll be enough, and then they're going to come up here and try to grab Louisville. And the Missouri Army, I'm just staying defensive in this theater, and so I'm bringing the Missouri Army down back into Arkansas, because if the Union gets aggressive and pursues, I'd rather have a battle in Arkansas than a battle in Missouri, for fighting spirit and morale reasons. Talked about that before. But all that, I think, is going to have to wait until the next episode. So in episode 2, I tried to avoid a lot of talking with time paused, which I did, but then I've come back and caught up with that and let y'all know what's going on. And that will do for episode 3. If you like what we're doing with the channel, if you like the content, then leave a like. Leave a comment, maybe even subscribe. But at any rate, thank you very, very much for, I just noticed this, the Union blockade is going into effect now. Over here, our Virginia ports are getting blockaded. Thank you very, very much for watching. I appreciate it.